Good evening. Tonight, back out of more familiar grounds, we're back at home. And tonight's topic, I wanted to touch on the availability of military equipment for the Ukraine from a manufacturer's point of view. As I said before, as I have been involved in the defense sector for a very, very long time. And I sell directly to the U.S. military and through two other defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and a few other ones. And our products today are somewhat different than what we used to do. Is one of our biggest customers back in the 90s was McDonnell Douglas before they became part of Boeing or were bought out at Boeing. And we were developing missile defense systems or missile guidance systems for the SLAM-ER missile, that is SLAM-ER for the extended range. Those were basically anti-tank or anti-ship rockets or missiles, and they could sink a missile basically. Similar to the Harpoon missiles, but different. They had a different purpose, and I don't think that they're being built anymore on active service at this point. And I've dealt with sonar systems, and I've dealt with for the Navy, and I have dealt with the Air Force and other departments for the Minutemen upgrades on the intercontinental ballistic missiles, because McDonnell Douglas at that time also was building and upgrading the nuclear warheads in their facility where the SLAM-ER missiles were built in St. Louis, Missouri. And now, with that being said, is the Ukraine right now is facing a pretty fierce battle there in various situations. For one is there's that region there south of Izium now, and the southern part, I forgot now the other town's name, is where the encirclement is starting to take more shape from the Russian side. And then, of course, the other part where they liberated the city. That's just all I'm going to say. I'm not going to get into the details here of the battle map tonight. But here's the problem with the Ukraine is facing is for almost, I would say, the better part now of 20 years, the Western militaries, especially here in the United States, has only ordered equipment and ammunition when the equipment they had was basically ready to expire with the shelf life. Every military piece of equipment has a shelf life when it is stored, and when they about ready to expire, similar to a supermarket, they're going to get disposed of, either sold if that is a sellable item, or then properly disposed of, dismantled, and recycled, and that sort of stuff if it comes to ammunition. And so they replaced only certain things then, and so we as defense contractors haven't built anything really until the government actually places an order for something. And then usually the whole thing goes into gear, and the lead times for most of these things are probably anywhere from 3 months to 3 years for the better part for us to build something after receive an order with a substantial down payment. These are not items you put on the shelf. This is custom made, and they order the stuff. The military was more interested in having the defense contractors do R&D work, new technology, laser field, laser weaponry, and that sort of stuff. And then an RF microwave range, that kind of warfare is new. So this is coming in these little robot soldiers, and micro drones and all of that stuff. That's what they have been interested in. A different style of warfare and newer things. This is all non-classified information I'm giving out here. You can read this You can research this on the internet. There's probably by far more detail in this. Now, in particular, the biggest problem is going to be just the conventional, weapons, like the Stinger missiles, the Stinger system. They're made by Lockheed Martin, I believe, or by Raytheon, and the parts for those which they need, they have a year lead time at least. So if the U.S. military is going to replace the Stinger missiles, they won't be going into production until next year because there's no inventory to build them, from whatever few parts they got. With my things, what I do today is I'm specialized in supplying the U.S. military with special electronics for their power generation, mobile power generation. These are tactical quiet generators, TQGs, and they come in a range from 5 kilowatt output power to up to 100. That's the most common sizes, and there's multiple steps in them, and we have gone through some transitions, model changes. They have now newer ones in service. And in the Afghanistan war, we had to produce quite a few of these circuit boards because the war in Afghanistan was very, very different. For one, the U.S. was directly involved. And what they would do is in these valleys outside Kabul and these other cities there in Afghanistan, they would set up small command posts with like 10 to 20 soldiers. I don't know exactly what size that would be, a battery. And they would set up on a mountain plateau, a camp there with tents and a fence around and that sort of stuff. And they would monitor the Taliban going in and out of these valleys. And sometimes they would get engaged in battle. They engaged the Taliban, or the Taliban would engage them in battles. And they would spend there probably 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and then they rotated. And they usually had a generator there, 10 kilowatt or 15 kilowatt generator. And we made special circuit boards for them so they could remotely start those generators, so they didn't have to go outside at night or whatever to activate them, since they were a little bit removed from the camps. Those generators were dropped off by helicopter with parachutes, and then, right next to the camp, they can do a precision drop on those. And we sold quite a few of them. I forgot now who the manufacturer was we dealt with. They came out of Virginia, I believe, West Virginia, Virginia. I'm pretty sure. UMC, UMH, I forgot it. But anyway, they were another defense contractor. They had set that up for them, and that was working in conjunction with smaller solar panels. And the purpose was to recharge the batteries in communications equipment and cell phones and that sort of stuff, and PCs, laptops, to power that kind of stuff up. So we sold from probably 2013 on until 2019, 2020, 21, quite a few of those. Now, those systems are not in operation in the Ukraine, not yet, because of the difference in the warfare of what we're looking at. This is a very different structure. It's a very different terrain. And here we're dealing with a full-blown army and not just the Taliban, with some fighters which travel usually in groups of 20, 30 fighters. That was probably pretty much the biggest contingency you would ever see of Talibans traveling at any one time. And this is kind of the situation. So the defense contractors, besides me, we were all geared up for that war, primarily for Afghanistan, and what the U.S. military needed there primarily, was small firearms, machine gun, type weapons, and probably some larger artillery to a certain extent, and then Javelin missiles, for instance. Yeah, the Javelin missiles, besides the launch system, the missiles itself have about 200 pieces of electronic stuff in it, components, semiconductors, microcontrollers, and that sort of stuff. And the question is, we don't know on how fast they can be resupplied. The US semiconductors manufacturers pretty much have closed down all of their semiconductor manufacturing here in the United States. They have moved those military parts to Thailand and to Malaysia and to the Philippines. That's the three main processing plants where we're getting our classified semiconductors from under a controlled process on how this actually works. And the resources, because of the COVID situation, was such that in those countries they had quite a, I would say, restrictions in place where they had the facility shut down, and then it took a while to get this going, and now we're like backlogged. It's not nearly as bad for the defense sector, not nearly as bad as what the automotive people are going through with the China semiconductor manufacturing, where all of those semiconductors come from. We don't use any parts which are made in China, and so they're all friendly, U.S. friendly, or associated and tied in with the United States on various levels, on the military level to begin with, especially the Philippines and Malaysia. So this whole thing is getting now to a point where neither the semiconductor manufacturers nor the manufacturers of passive elements, like here Vishay in the United States, they make our capacitors here in the United States, and the resistors we need can be supplied in any large quantities, because the capacities would have to be, the priorities for the capacities would have to be changed in order to get this going. And so in order to get the Javelin ammunition built, you need semiconductors and circuit boards, which we can make. And now this whole thing, depending on what the government is going to order at one point, and we don't know how much it is for what, that will prolong the whole process. So this whole thing is not a very, very quick thing. We cannot build anything, and there's virtually nothing on the shelves. I have prepared my company with the products we have and what the U.S. military is using at the moment, in alliance with the NATO troop movements over in Europe, and that deployment they have there, that we can supply this. I have put some on the shelf for immediate delivery. As soon as they find out that they need the circuit boards from us, we can deliver them, in anticipation that something is going to be happening here. But this is only on a smaller level based on what they have right now. If they're substantially gonna beef this up of what they have, then they're gonna have to have some lead times. The biggest problem right now is no one is knowing exactly from the government side on how this is going to develop, on how much they actually want and how much they need. No one has expressed this to us. They basically just told us to be ready for it without further saying on what they need and what they don't need and how much they need. We know that they want it probably pretty quickly. And we have the similar issue with combat vehicles, heavy vehicles, armored vehicles, because of the steels and the alloys associated, which have to be manufactured, which are not easily in stock. We're not in stock at this point. So this whole ramp up may take an entire year before the industry here, our defense industry, goes from a peacetime, or from which we have now is the end of the Afghanistan war, was already pretty quiet the last 3 years under Trump. There was already a downscaling and everything to begin with, to ramp this up to a war production. We have looked at this with the Russian, Federation, the troop movements and build-ups and that sort of stuff. But I think the great majority here in the country, in the defense sector, has believed that the Russian Federation would not engage in a larger war or conflict over there. And so what we're seeing now is that the artillery ammunition, probably what do you need for the 115 millimeters, 150 millimeters, 35 millimeter, anything up in that range, in that bigger range. That production would have to be ramped up and, to supply the Ukraine with sufficient amount of ammunition. And that is a little bit of tough going right now too, because the manufacturer for those, they weren't prepared at all, to deal with any larger ammunition deliveries for those type of artillery ammunitions, because that wasn't anticipated and it was not used very often, very seldomly in the Afghanistan war. They were using different types of weapons there. A lot of the stuff was drone and missiles, basically, guided missile systems which were deployed there to combat the Taliban in those regions. It wasn't as much of a direct man-to-man fight and artillery as what we're seeing now, so this entire thing has to come up. The Europeans are going to have similar issues. Almost any defense manufacturer is going to have to ramp up their production, and then the question is the sourcing of the material for this, because it is sort of coming out of the blue, and we will see. It would be easier if the government would give us clear ideas of what they're planning and what they're not planning. If they're just going to throw some stuff there to the Ukrainians now and then this is not going to be very helpful for us, because eventually what they're giving out of the inventory of the U.S. military will have to be replenished at one point or another with either the same or something newer, and that depends on how they're prioritizing it, because the U.S. military probably does not want to necessarily lose their, fighting capabilities, the response capabilities they need by giving out too much weapons. So we will have to see on how this is going to develop. One thing I found is it is virtually impossible to find any information of what equipment now, which has been sent over, not just from the United States, but also from other countries, have actually arrived on the Ukrainian battlefields. And what are the Ukrainians actually using at this point? We don't know. You don't see pictures. You don't see anything, video, no pictures, no nothing. I think I have seen one video of a howitzer, the first one which arrived finally over there. And but otherwise there's very little information available, or the Ukrainians haven't shared anything that they're using it. I think they had received another artillery weapon, and it said it took them 30 minutes to figure out. They're quite capable soldiers, these people. And I know that there's a contingent of Ukrainian soldiers, artillery specialists in Germany, being trained at the Panzerhaubitze 2000, which I think Germany's gonna send 5 in Holland. Netherlands is gonna send 7 of them, so they're gonna have a total of 12 of them, of these big, 155 millimeter howitzers, Panzerhaubitze 2000, which is a very advanced vehicle. That's another one of these vehicles which is going to take quite some time to build, actually, because of all the parts and the components involved and the complexity of this whole system. These are not systems which you can easily put together. The steel mills have to run special steels and alloys. These are, classified mixtures of different metals to gain the strength, and this has to be done, and then this has to be made, and usually it's a very expensive process to do this stuff. That's why no one puts these things on the shelf until the governments, the different governments actually order this. I do not know on how well the wartime production has started in the Russian Federation, on how they're doing on their side with ammunition, and what they're using, but it seems like they are not running out, and of course their supply lines are not disturbed at this point. So with the developments there in the Ukraine today to the Ukrainian people, I want to tell you, some days look better, some days look worse. In a war, it goes this way. You haven't won the battle until you have won the battle. And the old saying in America goes, everything is over when the fat lady sings. Now, the fat lady hasn't appeared yet on the stage, and I don't know where the Russians are keeping the fat lady, if they got one. They probably do, but she hasn't surfaced yet. So as long as we haven't seen the fat lady and she hasn't started to sing yet, everything is open, and we will see how it goes. I hope that the casualties are not too bad, but we will see. It won't be a quick fight. It won't be a quick war. This will drag on for a while, and I hope that we're going to get some clarity out of these governments on what they're expecting and what they calculated and what they think this is going to work, or how this is going to work. And then we will see, because with the Democrats, it is always a rather chaotic, undertaking. I don't know if the Republicans are necessarily that much better with organizing these kind of things. In the end, it's always play it by ear kind of a deal, see what they need and what they don't need. Well, I just thought I'm going to check in and share this with you. I hope this is of interest in the Ukraine. I'm just pointing this out of what it is, what it looks like. We're here on the front line in terms of the equipment, and we will see what we can do to assist you. And with that, you have a great evening.